Let's see, guys. Toine is ready. I'm gonna make a call with him. I'm gonna see. Here we go. Sorry for the delay, it says. Well, Toine, you don't have to apologize in any way, man. Let's see if it works today. Hello, Toine.
Hello.
I don't see you yet.
Let's see.
Yeah, now I do. Now I do. Now I need to just change the settings a little bit. Give me a second here.
Sure.
Because I'm setting it up as we speak.
All
You
right.
can see that it's a little bit dark with you.
It
Oh,
is.
I need to one more thing, Toine. I need to do one thing here in the background. You don't see that, but I need to copy your Bitcoin Cash QR code, which you shared with me, which we spoke about last week. I have received a Bitcoin Cash address from Toine. You can currently see the QR code in the screen and all the donations. No, it's not from Toine. It's not from Toine. It's from Toine's girlfriend. And the QR code that you currently see on the stream is a donation address for the girlfriend of Toine in case people want to donate to Toine. So Toine, with that out of the way, welcome again. Nice to have you on the show. I can see it's dark. We can barely see you.
I think that may be because of the lights behind me. Let me turn the lights behind me off. I think that will probably improve things.
All right.
Also, if you were to show yourself, then your light would light up my face. So.
Well, I can maybe change I can do some things here. The thing is that the problem is my video is being used by OBS, but I have another video, another webcam. Here we go. I think this should do it for Toine. Alright, now I'm going to record. Let me also record this stuff. Toine is okay with recording, that's all fine.
Much better.
Yeah, you can see me now, Toine?
Yes, I can.
I have a second webcam. So you are watching on the second webcam. I am recording this conversation, Toine, as always. I'm sharing it on the social media platforms, etc. Toine, how are you doing this week, man? What have you been up to? How nice to have you again on the stream.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me. And I apologize for it being so dark, but
don't worry about it.
Yeah,
we'll work around it.
Okay. Well, thank you for being so understanding. Let's see. I think you'll have to refresh my memory to tell me what the last thing was I told you about at the end of the last.
Basically, what we ended last week with. Last week was a sum up of all the blockades and ways how governments was working against you. You were talking about a receiver that took down one of your companies, was declared bankrupt, and then you got in touch with this receiver that was meant to, collect the assets of your company, and you spoke about that. So most of it was you mostly spoke because it was a little in between the history and the future, and we spoke in the period of 2005 after you're also with the advertisement that you did in the media in the Netherlands about taxation is theft, and the aftermath of that commercial. So that's what we did last week.
Right. Yes, I remember now. Yes, I told you about the bankruptcy of one of the companies
exactly, yes.
In 2010, and how the receiver was on a crusade.
Exactly, yeah. How he was like having his personal vendetta against your company and your personality as well. That he tried to basically go to your clients, for example, and make accusations that he couldn't really prove, according to that's what I understood from it. So
yeah, it was a trial by media.
Yeah, trial by media, exactly. Which is still very popular today.
Yeah.
I have collected a couple of questions, Twan, from people around.
Uh-huh.
So we could also start with those questions.
Sure, that's fine.
All right. First of all, I have somebody who already donated to this Bitcoin Cash address, and he made it a very small amount. And he says, "Did the girlfriend of Twan receive that amount?" So he wants you to check it, or maybe I should do it even different, and I'm gonna change one. Yeah, this is a little bit inconvenient. I believe I put the right address there, so let it be. Let it be. The address is correct.
All right.
Sorry for that confusion. A second question that I have from people is your opinion about Nigel Farage, and if you would support a Nexit. That is kind of the question that we ended with last week when we also had somebody asking whether or not you were in favor of Nexit.
Oh, yes. And I said, since I'm almost out of time, I'm going to give a very short answer, and
And
I
yes,
give a
yes,
more elaborate answer next time.
yes.
So I could do that. But I won't repeat what I said last time. Instead, what I'll do is I will try to explain in more detail my deeper motivation for being opposed.
Sounds good. I already told the people before you came on that your answer of last week was basically, if I remember it correct me if I'm wrong, you said that you like to have a trade agreement with all these nations. That's a very brief summary.
Yes, well, I'm in favor of free trade. Obviously, I believe that it is wrong and very damaging for governments to impose trade barriers in any form.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm very much in favor of unilateral free trade, like Hong Kong has done for many decades. They never bother trying to negotiate free trade agreements. Instead, they just unilaterally decided to do away with all trade barriers, all tariffs, and all non-tariff barriers, such as, for instance, uh, um, well, a lot of countries have a system where only a certain amount of a certain product is allowed to be imported,
Hmm.
and a trade quota system. And if the quota is filled, you're not allowed to import the product anymore at any price. Um, no matter how much tax you're willing to pay, they just won't let you import it anymore because the quota has been filled. And it's these types of trade barriers that should be abolished immediately. And Hong Kong did so after World War II, and they have done extremely well for themselves. Hong Kong used to be an extremely poor country. After World War II, um, it was it was so poor that the United Kingdom had, even though they just fought a major war, the United Kingdom's living standards were like 20 times higher than Hong Kong's living standards.
Hmm.
And today, Hong Kong is a lot wealthier than the UK is. So they have not just caught up with their former colonizer, they've actually surpassed them.
They overtook them.
Uh, and the reason that they have been so successful is because they have a very high degree of economic freedom. As a matter of fact, according to both um, there are two economic freedom indexes. One of them is called the Index on Economic Freedom by the Heritage Foundation, the Wall Street Journal. The other one is called Economic Freedom of the World Index by the Cato Institute and the Fraser Institute. And both of these indexes have Hong Kong as number one, as the freest economy in the world.
Hmm.
That is, obviously is why it has been so enormously successful, why it is such an extremely wealthy country, why one in four residents of Hong Kong is a millionaire, not in Hong Kong dollars, mind you, but in US dollars. Um, so, um, these projects to investigate the level of economic freedom are very interesting for anybody who wants to form an opinion on government policy in general, but especially on if you want to know why some countries are very successful, why some countries are very rich, and why some countries are very poor, what is causing it, then this is research that you absolutely should study. And what you will find, I'll give you a sneak preview. What you will find if you read these studies is that there's an extremely strong correlation between economic freedom on the one hand and a lot of indicators of human flourishing and human well-being, of happiness, of wealth, of economic growth. On the other hand,
Basically, when the government doesn't mingle, people get happy.
yes, that is correct. A very important factor in determining the level of economic freedom of a country is the tax burden and the regulatory burden. Those are not the only things that are considered. Also, another factor that is considered is free trade, the level of trade restrictions or free trade. Another important factor is access to sound money. A lot of people in a lot of poor countries restrict their people's ability to use foreign currencies. Instead, they insist that transactions are done only in the local currency. And if you want to buy a foreign currency, that you are forced to buy it at the official government exchange rate, which is usually extremely bad compared to the black market exchange, which is the real exchange rate, obviously.
I have that experience here too. If I receive euro, there are two ways to exchange. You can either go to the bank and you lose approximately between 3 and 5%, or you can go to the street dealer basically, and they get 3 to 5% more. So yeah.
Yeah, but that's actually 3 to 5%. That's already bad. But in countries that have very strict currency controls, it's a lot worse.
Yeah.
It's like on the black market, you can often get twice or 3 times or 4 times, sometimes 10 or 20 times as much for a Western currency than you can get when you go to the official government channel.
And places where this is today, would that be a Venezuela kind of place?
Oh yeah, yes, of course.
Yeah.
And any country that has a lot of inflation usually has currency controls, because if they didn't, people would just stop using the local currencies and start using the dollar or another currency instead. So they have to force them to use this lousy currency, or they wouldn't do it.
Well, we already are being forced, right? Because we have to pay our taxes with it. And
that's true, and there are other ways the government is manipulating us to use their currency. That is true, but in countries that have hyperinflation like Venezuela, the level of coercion that is used to force people to use local currency is a lot worse than it is in the place like Western Europe. There's always, I mean, our governments are bad, but there are always governments that are even worse.
Yeah.
Yes.
In a way, the Netherlands is not so bad off, right? Although your stories make us, see the darker side of it, but still, you could be born in Venezuela as well. Let's call it like that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you look at these international comparisons, usually countries in the northwest of Europe do very well. Typically, they're usually in the top 20 of the freest economies in the world. So yes, most countries are worse. Typically, Western countries tend to be in the top 30 or so, or top 40 or so of the freest economies in the world. And if you live in one of these countries, like I do, and like probably most of your listeners do as well, you are confronted with government intervention, and you're confronted with the damage done, and with the freedoms lost. And a lot of people who think freedom is very important, they often have the feeling that they must be living in one of the worst countries around, because
Mm.
it couldn't possibly be even worse elsewhere. And the sad news is that it can be worse than elsewhere, and it is worse elsewhere usually. In most countries, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Um, that's no reason to be very satisfied with the level of freedom that we have. It's like being healthy versus being very sick. If you're a little bit sick, then obviously you're much better off than a person who is so sick that he has only a couple of months to live, or that he's constantly in pain. So obviously other people are even worse off. But just because other people are even worse off, it doesn't mean they shouldn't strive to be healthy.
Yeah, yeah. You would
And,
fool yourself, telling yourself that, oh, look at him, he's so much worse. I'm okay, you know. Yeah,
yeah,
I get your point. I get your point there.
yeah,
Hey, Twan, one thing in between, because we are live at the moment, of course, in the
yeah.
stream. I run my raffles, so give me a moment, because 20 minutes went by, and we're gonna pick a winner. We can have a little sip. I'm gonna pick a winner out of 6 participants. Good luck to all 6. Juldao, congratulations, my friend. By the way, Twan, if you want to have a little update on who is watching exactly, we have a viewer from Serbia, which is probably me. Then we have Nigeria, United States, and the Netherlands. So that is our setting at the moment. I added a little widget that tells me everybody's location when they watch. So anyway, here is the wheel. We're gonna spin it. Loser draw. Well, with you in the streamed one, I cannot allow a loser draw. We're gonna spin it again. Juldao, let's see what you want. 50,000 honk with a multiplier. It's gonna be a highlight video, Twan. I cannot allow loser draws in the video. 50,000 honk. A new raffle is starting in a second, and everybody can participate again. Then I would like to say something else. I already started it. Exclamation mark raffle if you want to join. I have a friend. We have visited him together a couple of years ago, Twan. I call him a friend, but he's more like a co-freedom fighter. Let's call it like that. And
Mm-hmm.
this guy, his name is Sven Hulleman. We went to The Hague one day together, where he launched his Gulden Terug initiative, which is basically a basic income for the Netherlands. And I'm not sure if you remember, if you were there all the way, but when he started his speech, because he rented a location there, and then when all the people were inside, he started to say, the first thing he said, I was also inside, and he said, everybody, this is Yoshi Livo. Yoshi Livo makes money with speculation, and that's why his solution will never work. So that was great introduction of him to me. Unfortunately, because I also created my own basic income ID one day, like a couple of years back. Unfortunately, his ID didn't work out. But here it comes. I am inviting this guy to the stream because he put a video online last week where he said we need to work together more. So I was like, hey, maybe this guy has finally seen the light and he wants to work with me. It's not like that. He wants to work with you, Twan. So I just want to tell you, if you agree with it, and if you would come again next week, I would like to invite Sven on the show and have a chat with the 3 of us. How does that sound to you?
Sure, why not?
All right, all right. So that's settled. That's done. Second is a follow-up question by the same person who asked you the question about Nigel Farage. So we're going back into the interview. Sorry for all the confusion, and I'm all over the place sometimes. But he then asks, he first asked the question about your opinion on Nigel Farage, which, by the way, that was not answered yet. But he
Yeah,
asks,
I'm still
has
answering the question on Nexit, basically.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
But
He has a follow-up
your
question and
point.
asks, has free trade stopped developing countries from developing? So with
No.
that second
Okay.
question in mind, let's continue our conversation.
No, I mean, free trade is exactly what has helped developing countries develop much faster.
Clear.
Two freest economies in the world have been for a very long time, for many decades, Hong Kong and Singapore. Both of these countries used to be extremely poor um, after World War II. Even as late as the early 1960s, they were still extremely poor.
Mm-hmm.
And they have opened up their economies. They've raised their level of economic freedom. They have eliminated their trade barriers and their tariffs to a huge extent. In the case of Hong Kong, they have done complete unilateral free trade and complete unilateral abolition of all trade barriers, international trade barriers. And as a result, they are now extremely prosperous countries. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the average Western country has a GDP per capita of something around, I don't know, 40, 50,000 euros a year, something like that.
Yeah.
Or dollars, I should say. In Hong Kong, I believe it's like 60,000 a year per person. That includes women, children, elderly people, handicapped people. Everybody's included in these numbers, of course. In Singapore, it is even higher. I believe it's something like $80,000 a year. Uh, and it's very obvious that free trade is a very important factor in in development, in economic growth. And not just it's not just free trade; it's other forms of economic freedom as well that are also very important.
Mm-hmm.
If you study these projects, these research projects on economic freedom, it is absolutely stunning if you see the correlation between economic freedom on the one hand and just about every single indicator of human well-being on the other hand, whether it is GDP per capita or GDP per capita growth, whether it's unemployment, which of course is a negative indicator. Uh, the short story is the higher the level of economic freedom, the higher the economic growth, the higher the GDP per capita, the lower the unemployment, the lower the corruption, the higher the life expectancy. And this is dramatic. Like if you study the 40 the 40 countries that have the highest level of economic freedom, people's life expectancy is on average is 80 years. If you look at the 40 countries that have the lowest level of economic freedom, about 160 countries are studied, and they put them in four groups of 40 countries each. And if you look at the 40 countries that have the lowest level of economic freedom, their average life expectancy is 60 years. That's a 20-year difference. In other words, these governments are robbing 20 years of their lives.
Yeah. I can already say, Twan, I am being corrected here by the chat because I didn't phrase my question correctly about how free trade would stop developing countries. It's not like that. The question, one who asked the question, meant to say that countries like African countries do not have access to the competition of free trade like the European Union, uh, because that European Union is, in a way, putting a price on participating in the free trade, and those African countries, according to my question asker, Mr. Gigolo, by the way, um, 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 yeah, so I didn't phrase my question correct, and I still don't really know if I did it correct now. But he more meant to say, like, isn't the European Union abolishing free trade in a way by putting such a high price on
Yes,
participating in their system?
that is true. The European Union has ended trade barriers within the European Union. But in order for a country to become a member state of the European Union, it must erect very strict trade barriers against the products of all other countries. To give you an example, Estonia became independent from the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. I believe it was 1991. And at the time, it was an extremely poor country, as all former republics of the Soviet Union had.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had a prime minister who was a fan of Milton Friedman in the early 90s. His name was Martelaar.
Okay.
And all of his economic advisors said to him, yes, well, these ideas of Milton Friedman, you could introduce them, but it must be done very slowly, because if you do it too quickly, that will become a terrible disaster, because you must see it as a train. If a train goes too fast in a curve, it will derail.
Derails.
So you have to do it slowly. And he said to all of his economic advisors, "Thank you very much for your advice, but I'll take Milton Friedman's advice instead." And he did decide to free up the economy of Estonia in a very fast pace. I visited Estonia in August of 1993, and at the time, they had already privatized all the government assets, mainly by returning those assets to the people they were stolen from by the Soviets in the when the Soviet Union occupied Estonia in the early 1940s. They gave it back to the owners, and if the owners were dead, they would find their descendants, they would find their heirs, and give it back to those heirs. They've done this in a very quick pace. Not only that, they had introduced a flat tax, one of the first countries in the continent of Europe or anywhere in the world. I mean, before Estonia, the flat tax was to be found only in a few tax havens and in Hong Kong. I mean, by now, most countries in Eastern Europe have a flat tax, but they were the pioneers. They're the first ones to introduce it. They reduced the corporate income tax to zero. They unilaterally abolished all tariffs and all non-tariff barriers to trade.
And a flat tax, just for my vision, a flat tax means you pay a certain amount regardless of how much money your company is making.
No, a flat tax means that you pay the same percentage of tax on your income regardless of how high your income is.
Okay, okay, yeah,
So
yeah,
most countries have a progressive income tax,
yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
the more productive you are, the higher the tax rate that you must pay. Um, and Estonia was one of the first countries to introduce a flat tax. At the time, I think the rate was like 26%, which at the time in the early 90s was considered a very low rate. They introduced a constitution that said that in order to pass a law, a two-third majority must be obtained, whereas in order to abolish a law, to repeal a law, one-third of the votes of parliament would be sufficient to repeal it. They got rid of all subsidies, including agricultural subsidies. But when they joined the EU in 2004, one of the conditions that they had to meet to be able to join was to reintroduce all these trade barriers, these tariffs, these non-tariff barriers, these quotas, subsidies, agricultural subsidies, all these things that they had gotten rid of in the early 90s, and they had grown very fast in the 90s as a result of having such a high level of economic freedom. They had to reintroduce them in order to qualify for membership of the European Union. I assume the reason they did it anyway was because they were still afraid of the Russians and were willing to pay this price to be more protected or less dependent.
What I always think is most of the
Russia.
politicians that make such a decision will see a tremendous increase in their salary because now they can also go to Europe and they can go to Brussels. right? So
Yeah, that may have been a factor as well. I agree. I agree that may have been a factor as well. The this prime minister that I described, who was the Milton Friedman follower, called Matlar, he had already resigned by the time that they started negotiating access to the European Union, or accession to the European Union. So your question is correct that that the European Union obviously is not just an organization that promotes free trade. It definitely has a lot of.
less and less, I would say, less and less. It started like that.
Yes, that is correct. That's what I said last week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Up until the early '90s, in general, the European Union has brought more freedom. Uh, and so the benefits have outweighed the cost. And since then, the new trend has been more harmonization of the tax burden, of the regulatory burden, especially. And as a result, since the early '90s, all things that have changed in the European were changes for the worse, or almost all of them were. So that's why I'm very critical of the European Union. Would much prefer going back to the original idea of the European Economic Community, but of course it takes. I mean, a single member state like the Netherlands or the UK cannot force the European Union to go back to the original idea of a European Economic Community. So, since that's not an option, Brexit, or in the case of the Netherlands, an exit, is an obvious solution to that problem. Now, getting back to economic freedom, um, I mentioned that economic freedom is extremely important, that it correlates with all these beautiful things that almost everybody wants. I mean, everybody wants economic growth. Everybody wants higher life expectancy and lower child mortality, and lower unemployment and lower corruption, and more access to clean drinking water, and more foreign direct investment, and higher incomes, and less poverty, and all these things that correlate with economic freedom. Everybody is in favor of them. It's just that a lot of people either don't believe or don't realize that what it takes to get there
yeah,
is more economic freedom. Even happiness has been tested, the level of happiness in different countries, and even happiness correlates very strongly with economic freedom. Now, obviously, correlation does not prove causation. In order to build a credible case that economic freedom causes all these wonderful things,
hmm
you need a theory, a credible theory that explains the causal relationship. And I believe that such a credible theory exists, because it's basically common sense. Common sense dictates that if a person, if you restrict a person's freedom, uh, be, because you either forbid him to do something that he wanted to do, or force him to do something he didn't want to do, that this is not just a restriction of freedom. This is also causing him to lose a certain level of happiness,
hmm
to lose a certain level of wealth, uh, to lose a certain level of human welfare. Because if he had been free to choose his own actions, if he had not been forbidden to do what he wanted to do, if he had not been forced to do what he didn't want to do, then he would have chosen that line of action that would have maximized his happiness, his flourishing, his wealth,
hmm
his
It
income.
makes sense to me, Twan. It makes sense to me. You know.
So that's why it's very obvious that there's a causal relationship between limiting someone's freedom and also damaging his success and
Yeah,
his
yeah.
welfare, his wealth, and his happiness. So then the next question will be, once we've established that economic freedom is what we need to increase human flourishing, your human happiness, and human wealth and welfare. The next question is strategy. What's the best strategy to obtain this objective? And there are many different strategies that are possible. One of them is politics. Personally, I'm very skeptical of the idea that we can achieve freedom um, by
Voting for it.
yeah, by voting for it, by obtaining political power and using political power to achieve our objectives. I think that's it's very rare that that happens. It's very hard for that to happen because the system that we have, the political system that we have, is biased in favor of bigger government. And I could talk for an hour about why that is, but the short version is that um, um, it has to do with the fact that your vote doesn't really matter. So if you spend a lot of time finding the perfect car, you can buy it. If you spend a lot of time finding the perfect house, you can buy it or rent it. If you spend a lot of time trying to decide which candidate is the best candidate to vote for, then your vote doesn't matter because the chance that your vote will determine the outcome of the election is lower than the chance that you'll get killed in a car crash on the way to the voting booth in most cases. And that is why people tend to not educate themselves very well about these things, and that is why they tend to choose their political views and their candidates not through very careful study. Most people do is
Emotion.
they go along with what their friends and family,
Yeah. What the
co
media tells them.
bosses are in favor of. Because if you go against the views of your friends and family and spouse and boss and coworkers, they could make hell for you. They could make life hell for you. They could treat you badly. They
You don't
could,
have to tell me, Twan.
yeah.
That's how I end up with a honkler wig and a red nose. Hey Twan, one thing, because we are close to 10 o'clock and I live in a small apartment with small everything, and I'm in love with my stream, but I also don't want to bother my neighbors too much. So I end it around 10 o'clock, which is close to this moment now.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have one more question from the stream, which says, could you see a could you see a decentralized platform somewhere in the future that politics cannot touch but free trade can thrive on? For example, a decentralized exchange for free trade. So we have a group of crypto coiners here in the chat, and to answer the question myself a little bit, I highly do believe in such a platform. The only problem is, how will we get it to be legitimized by everybody? Because we can start a platform and do our thing there, but uh, yeah, if nobody, if a very select small group of people, for example, all the Liberlanders, would use that, then how much of an impact will it really have in the world? So, to rephrase the question, uh, can a decentralized platform that politics cannot touch drive free trade?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but
Okay, let me, sorry,
I'm
because my
very much
English sucks sometimes.
decentralization.
Could we build a decentralized platform which is out of control of politics, and then use that decentralized platform for our economy to thrive?
You mean the way that Bitcoin has done and other cryptocurrencies have done, for instance?
Yes, but without the centralized exchanges, basically. Because those exchanges today, in the last couple of months, so many countries came out with new regulatory requirements for exchanges, and they need to do a KYC, for example. And, you know, we need to get out of these central entities that dictate to us what kind of a law we have to follow. So could do you believe that humankind is capable of setting up something truly decentralized and live with it, basically? Or are there always people that will try and destroy such a thing because, well, they need the security of the government in a way? You know what I mean? How successful could we be in setting up something outside of the current power systems?
Well, obviously, Bitcoin already has been a success up to a point. I mean, it's not as if the dollar and the euro have lost the battle and Bitcoin has beaten them. That's not what's happened. But but Bitcoin has a certain role in the world. It's already being used in the world, especially people who um, how shall I put this? Who run the risk of being bothered by the government, being harassed by the government, being robbed by the government. Um, for instance, because their political views are very unpopular with their government.
Hmm.
Especially these kinds of people. WikiLeaks is a very good example. WikiLeaks
Yeah,
were cut off from all credit card
that got me into
suppliers.
Bitcoin.
And for a moment there, it looked as if they were finished because nobody could donate to them anymore. And cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, saved them.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Absolutely,
and this is not
absolutely.
unique to WikiLeaks. It's a very good example of how it can work. But but they're not the only ones. So it's already functioning to a point. It's already making the world a better place and a freer place as we speak. So yes, I do believe it can have an impact, and I do believe the impact will grow um, because it is, in many ways, it is a better system.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I
Permission.
think so too.
It's very hard for governments to seize cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. It's very hard for them to investigate it. It's very hard to stop it. It's very hard.
Even if they seize it,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they can sell it, for example.
Uh,
They have the hard disk with the bitcoins on it, but there's a password, and well, I cannot get it out.
yeah. That's true. So that's uh, obviously a major advantage of this system. It brings a lot of privacy, a lot of independence. Um, um, Government currencies tend to be inflated a lot, whereas in the case of most cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, you know upfront what the maximum number is that can be brought into circulation,
Yeah,
and as a result, there's no need to fear inflation, let alone hyperinflation. So there are many ways in which it is a superior kind of money. Also, the transaction costs are quite low. The speed at which transactions are done is very high. Uh,
yeah.
so there are all these obvious advantages uh, compared to traditional currencies.
So
So
I would
yeah.
like to, we have been talking. This is the third interview now with the two of us, and so far we have been mostly talking about what happened in the past, and I would like to slowly see us go to into the future a little bit. And how do you see that happening, or what are the options that we have, or what is what are you working on today, something like that. But for today, because it's 10 o'clock, I know that we are having a great chat, and I am if you don't know, I'm locked in my home again. I have a Quaranstream, as I call it this week, Quaranstreaming,
Mhm.
and I'm still locked in my home for 1 day and 12 hours more. But um, it is 10 o'clock. My neighbors are also, in favor of their peace. So I would like to kind of end it for today. I want to thank you a lot for being here once again, answering questions of people. And I have one more last. This is a really quick question asked by Johan, our big friend of Freedom Radio. He asks, ask Toine who is his favorite candidate of the Libertarian Party in the United States.
Ah.
By the way, for the ones that don't know, Adam Kokesh is coming to the stream one of these days.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I met Adam at the Libertarian Party of California convention in February in Los Angeles, California.
Great. I have an interview with him somewhere next week. I think on Friday.
And there was a debate there between several candidates for the LP. I think there were about 6 or 7 that were allowed to be on stage for the debate. And there were several candidates that I liked. My all-time favorite Libertarian Party presidential candidates were Harry Browne and Ron Paul. So that tells you what my standards are. Those are the kind of people I see as candidates.
Ren or Ron Paul?
Ron Paul.
Yeah. So he has the Liberland passport. I don't know if you know that. Ron Paul has the Liberland passport.
Yeah. Well, the people running this time, one of the people that I liked was Bumper Hornberger, Jacob Hornberger.
Yeah.
He's been an active libertarian for many decades. I think I met him for the first time at the Libertarian Party National Convention in Washington, D.C. in 1996, where Harry Browne was elected. He was a keynote speaker, gave an excellent speech. I've been following him since. He's very principled. He's a great speaker. He's a great writer.
We're trying to reach out to him as well to get him on the stream one day.
Also, his brand, you might say, of libertarianism is there are some differences among libertarians and different views, and there are usually not very different, but they're somewhat different. And I like his most of his views. And he has proven that he is that he's very passionate about spreading this message of liberty. So he's one of the candidates that I like.
I believe he's the favorite for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, I think so too. Unless Justin Amash were to announce running as a candidate. He probably won't, but if he did, I think he would probably become the favorite.
Yeah. I'm sorry to say that I don't know the name. I'm sorry.
Okay, he has been a member of Congress of the House of Representatives for I believe he was elected in 2010 with the Tea Party movement.
Okay.
He is a candidate, I believe, from Michigan, and he is very principled. He's a hardcore libertarian. He ran as a Republican, but he has now left the Republican Party. And what the straw that broke the camel's back for him to leave the Republican Party was the Trump impeachment trial. He believed that Trump had, in fact, done what he was accused of, and he believed that was bad enough for him to be impeached.
Yeah.
And he was the only one in the Republican Party, the only elected, the only congressman or senator in the Republican Party that felt that way, with the sole exception of the senator from Utah, Mitt Romney, who did vote in favor of impeachment on one count. And he was very vocal about this. He always announces all of his votes. He explains his votes on, I believe, on Facebook. Every time he votes, he explains why he voted the way he did.
That's good. Yeah.
and when he decided to go against the Republican Party, he decided to leave the Republican Party. And he's an independent now. He hasn't joined the Libertarian Party yet. He's independent. He will run again for Congress, and he may run. He'll probably run as an independent. But if he were to announce his candidacy for candidate for president for the Libertarian Party ticket, I think he would have a very good chance of winning.
All right, all right.
Because he has a very good track record. He has a very good voting record, which of course is always better than just having a good platform.
Yes.
Because when you have a voting record, it means you prove that you've gone against the
Yeah,
very
yeah, 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 yeah.
currents, very strong pressure you're under when you are elected to Congress to go along with the flow, you might say.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's another candidate that I like is Adam Kokesh. And what I like about him is this platform of getting rid of the federal government.
Yeah, he did an interview with John McAfee, which we also spoke to already once, and that
Yeah,
was basically the what triggered me to call him as well, and the Fed.
yeah,
He's calling it.
yeah. I must admit that I do believe that it is hard to win a lot of votes with that message because most people will not be ready for it, will not understand it, and most people will probably
Call him a problem child or something like that.
yeah, not take it seriously.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I can understand why people don't support him. Um, but I mean, the principle is obviously correct. It's a very great idea, and if you get rid of the federal government, then what you have left is 50 competing states.
Mhm.
And the level of competition will be very much higher than it is today, because today you can escape the state burden, a little bit of the state burden, the state tax burden, the state regulatory burden by moving to another state. But you cannot escape the federal tax burden, the federal regulatory burden. So that means that competition is limited. If there were no federal government, then we'd have a lot more competition, which basically explains why I'm so critical of the European Union and in favor of Nexit and Brexit, because what
We
I'm
are
fearing
copying.
is what
Copycats.
the European Union is doing is
Yeah.
moving towards is what the United States has already done, which is
Yeah.
create this huge federal government with a federal income tax and reducing the level of competition amongst the member states.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I mean,
Yeah.
I can see a European tax system happening. If we don't stop it, if we don't stop the EU mindset, then very soon everybody in the EU will pay some kind of a EU taxes. That's just I see that happening. But let's hope we can stop them, right?
Well, another
But,
candidate I like. I don't support him, but I do enjoy watching him. Is Vermin Supreme.
we
Uh,
also had him on the stream. Yeah, yeah.
yes.
He was a very very sympathetic guy. Although I must say, it sounded to me as if he was a little bit compromised. He was so overwhelmed that it was now a serious thing that he said on the stream. I asked him the question, "What do you think about all this corona?" And then he said, "Oh, we have to listen to the what's the name of that? The people that know, right? The medics and everything." And
The expert.
yeah, the experts. And my opinion on that is that those experts in the World Health Organization are so incredibly corrupt. But okay, that was his answer. We have to listen to the experts. So
Maybe you meant the real experts.
I don't know, but he was a great guy. He was a great guy to have there. So Veerman Supreme is running. He is he is an official candidate.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet him or do
Yes,
something?
I met him at the same convention in Los Angeles in February.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great guy. It was a very nice interview. For the ones that I don't know if I have it here, if for the ones that missed it, the interview with Vermin Supreme is on YouTube. Just like this conversation with Toine Manders will be in a couple of hours when I uploaded everything. And Twan, I would like to invite you, invite you again for next week when I'm also going to invite Sven Hulleman to the show. I can already tell you, Sven is going to invite you to his show one day. So that's up to you whether or not you want to do that. But let's see if we can make
Is that Café Weltschmerz, or is
yes,
it?
yes, exactly. That's Café Weltschmerz guy. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, actually was already interviewed once by them, and that was quite a pleasant
I think they
experience.
are one of the, for me, I have the feeling that they are one of the only independent journalist platforms in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
All the others have been compromised.
So yes, I'd be happy to be interviewed again by Café Weltschmerz. It was like I said, it was a pleasant experience.
But the thing is, Twan, he doesn't want to show himself here on the stream, most likely because of my wig and whatever. But uh,
And
I'm gonna invite him here, and then he can invite you, and that's how I get something out of it as well. You know. So, I want to thank you again, Twan, for being here. Let's be in touch. We now have a Bitcoin Cash address, but let's slowly work, because that's another thing I want to talk with you about, is to create a Twan SLP token, Manders SLP, and then have your own token, and the people that own that token receive a small reduced price, a small reduction in the cost if they become your customer, for example. And that way, I have a yeah, well, we can try and get some new customers to not your business, but from your girlfriend. And that's the same with. Let me conclude with that. There is a Bitcoin Cash QR code right now in the stream. Anybody that wants to send a donation can do so, and those donations end up with the girlfriend of Twan. So that is the well, that is what I wanted to say. That is all the mandatory stuff that I now spoke out. And then because it's just it's the time, and I want to thank you for today, Twan. I think we had a great chat again. We answered the questions of all the people here. We have a lot of compliments here. This has been such an amazing stream. Less than three meaning a heart. This has just been so yeah, a lot of compliments. I can read them out, but I guess you believe it. And let's just continue, right? And talk a little bit, because so many things are happening today. It's such an amazing time to talk with you, because everything is going on right now, and I really love to hear more about how you see the future and what you are doing today, how you are spending your time. So this conversation is not over, but it is for today. Can we agree on that?
absolutely.
All right, Van.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks once again for being here. I will share the video once it's up. You will get it from me, and we will share it on Facebook and all the other social media platforms. And we will see you again next week. Time will be announced on a later moment, but Twan is coming back, everybody. Don't worry. If you have questions tomorrow, it's not too late. Okay, Twan.
Okay. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Goodbye.
Have a good night. Bye bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Toine Manders in the stream. Great guy. Great guy. Let's go